Even though I was never really one for taking guitar lessons and I learned how to play prior to the advent of YouTube, I'd like to take just a second and introduce you to my favorite guitar teacher. What is up, old souls? This is Reed from Every Man Vintage, and that was my favorite guitar teacher, my 1955 Martin D-18. So I got a different kind of video for you today. I'm not going to spend the whole time talking about stories or just big ideas. I just want to give you a little bit of insight into the genesis of my love for vintage acoustic guitars. I'll have a video forthcoming about the genesis of my love for tube amps, vintage tube amps, and old electric guitars. But for now, I want to speak to the acoustic side of my musical personality, and it really starts with this old D-18 of mine. So I want to accomplish two things. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I got the guitar and a little bit about it, and then I want to talk about this thing we call player's grade instruments, because this guitar definitely falls into that category. So the year was 2005. I was playing with a regional bluegrass band called Billy Renee and Cumberland Gap, based out of Mount Sterling, Kentucky. And we were playing the Frankfurt Bluegrass Festival in Frankfurt, Kentucky, when we heard this guy had an old D-18 at his camper that he was interested in selling. At the time, I was playing a Kendrick custom dreadnought guitar. It was built for me by a guy named Neil Kendrick out of Frenchburg, Kentucky. It was a rosewood guitar and was and still is an absolute beast of a guitar. But I was looking for A, something old, and B, a mahogany guitar. And so when I heard about this guitar, it really got my wheels turning. So we went over after our set, and I played it, and I immediately fell in love with this guitar. Got back together with the guy a few weeks later once I was able to scrounge together the money that I'd been working all summer to make in order to pay for college. Made all that money and then used it to buy this particular guitar, and I'm glad that I did. Alright, so this guitar is a very special guitar to me because it taught me so much. I had a lot of mentors and friends and musicians tell me after I got this guitar, my guitar playing improved immensely. And the only thing that really changed was, well, there's a couple of things. First off, I'm sure I was practicing more because it was a new guitar and I was super stoked to have it. Secondly, it changed the way that I heard music and the role that my guitar playing played in it. It just sounded like an old record, and it just inspired me in that way. And it taught me so much about what it means to be a better bluegrass guitar player and a musician in general. So this guitar had some issues. It had somebody painted the back of it, so it had been lightly sanded down and resprayed. It had a few other issues that make it not quite as valuable, but it also made it so that I could attain it at that time. And that brings us to my next point, which is player's grade instruments. I'm going to be upfront with you and say that I absolutely hate that term. At that time, you're talking 15 years ago, player's grade was maybe more applicable than it is now, because honestly, most old guitars that people are really interested in, if they are player's grade, are still outside the price range of most players. And so I hate that term, but I also hate the other side of that term, which says, well, if it's a 1935 herringbone or if it's a 59 burst, that it's not a player's guitar. And I just think that's utter nonsense. They're all made to be played. Old tube amps, old electric guitars, old acoustic guitars are all reliable, sound great, and are perfect to gig with and tour with if you take care of them. All right, and so I hate the idea that some guitars are for players and some are for collectors. No, all guitars were made for players. They're not made for collectors. And so I hate that term. But it did make this guitar attainable for me at that time, and I'm so glad that it did. Because I'm not saying all old guitars are great and all new guitars are bad. There's just so much wrong with all of that. But what I do want you to know is there is absolutely something that sounds old. All right, there's a dryness and a directness, a seasoned tone, a smokiness maybe. I know it sounds like I'm talking about wine or something, but when you really get to listening, there's a difference. Some instruments just sound old, and amazingly enough, they're almost all old that sound that way. So this guitar had that. It just sounded like an old record. The way I could play a G run in a bluegrass song and that G note would just punch right through. And it just, I mean, it had it. It sounded like an old record. And it utterly changed my life and became my favorite guitar teacher. All right, and so I wanted to take a second and share that with you. If you have an instrument that taught you a lot, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Please comment, what is that instrument that taught you how to become a better musician? I'd love to hear from that. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell button so you receive notifications. But really, we're all here because we want to hear a 1955 Martin D-18. So I threw together a real quick, very simple, stripped down version of the old fiddle tune Angeline the Baker so that you can hear my favorite guitar teacher of all time and hear its well-seasoned and old sounding voice. So until next time, I'm Reed from Everyman Vintage. We'll see you later.